So welcome everybody. I'm Rick Kyte. I'm the director of the D.B. Reinhart Institute for Ethics and Leadership. I've been teaching here at Viterbo for 25 years and decided it was time to do a lecture series. And I thought I would do a series to talk about what I have learned most over the years. I've been reading a lot of classical literature for a long time, and I think it's really important that to understand where we are in a society, we have to understand where we came from. And so we started out 2 lectures ago talking about Socrates and the idea of truth, because we only have the idea that we have of truth because of Socrates. Our society, in fact, the way we think at all would be unrecognizable without Socrates in our history. And then 2 weeks ago, we talked about the idea of good and how that is really grounded in Plato's writings, and especially his book, The Republic. And today we're going to talk about love. And I want to focus mainly on some things that St. Augustine says. Now, Augustine was a bishop of Hippo, that is a region in North Africa, in current-day Algeria. He was living. This would be in the 400s. That he's living early 400s. This is when the Roman Empire is in great turmoil. They've been battling tribes in the north, and they're only a few years away from the invasion of Rome, and so it's a time of great violence, a lot of political turmoil. In the year that I'm taking some comments from Augustine from, the year 416, this is the year that yet again another usurper took the throne in Rome. I mean, they're having constant turmoil at the top in their leadership. And he chooses to focus that year on love. So it's a fascinating thing, what he says about love in a time of great political turmoil and great violence. And so I'm going to get to that in a minute, but I want to start out just by observing that when we use the word love, we talk about it in very many ways. We talk about love that's sometimes quite deep and profound and meaningful. I love my wife, who's sitting right here. I love my country. I love my community. I love my family and my children. I used to love my dog until my dog died. We have a cat. I don't love the cat. I'm not a cat lover. I'm a dog lover. We even have a word for people who are dog lovers. It's called a cinephile. Nobody ever uses that term. I had to look it up because it's easier to say dog lover. We have lots of words for people who love different kinds of things. People who love books are bibliophiles, right? But we say that we love different kinds of food. Some people say that they love broccoli, or some people even like pumpkin spice latte for some reason. I don't understand. That's just weird to me, but some people say they love it, right? We use the word love to describe a whole range of attitudes towards things. One has in common is the things that we're drawn towards. The things that we're drawn towards, we say we love. And sometimes that's in kind of superficial ways. Sometimes it's in quite deep ways. Love is so universally used, and it has been for so long, that in some ways we'd say it's a defining feature of our life. That is, if I know what you love and who you love, I know who you are. Like that's the defining feature of our lives. Augustine said, a community is defined by what the people love in common. And you can think of that. You can ask, well, like, what do the people in La Crosse love? Well, what do we celebrate in common? Beer, the bluffs, the river, right? There's certain traditions and there's certain features that we love in common, and those are the defining characteristics of our community. And so So love is really definitive of much of our lives. And yet, when we look at what dominates our news, if somebody were to come and say, like, not talk to us and just observe, like, what do we talk about publicly? What's in our news and so forth? It's overwhelmingly tragedy and a lot of violence. I'll give you an example of this, like the way in which we think love is defining and meaningful, and yet we occupy a lot of our public conversation is occupied by violence. So last week we held a ceremony that was really lovely. We planted a tree in honor of Daryl Klotz's 20 years of Holocaust education here. And the tree comes from a cutting of a tree that was originally planted by children who were prisoners at Terezin, a concentration camp in Germany. It was a model concentration camp, so the Nazis used it to demonstrate to the Red Cross visitors that they had humane conditions in their camps. Of course, it was only humane when the Red Cross was visiting it, but conditions weren't quite as bad there as in some other camps. One of the adults in the camp, who, along with some others, created a secret school because they wanted to teach the children their traditions. Her name was Irma Lauscher. She wanted to create a meaningful moment for the children because a holiday was coming up, the Jewish Year of the New Trees. And so she persuaded one of the guards that seemed fairly friendly, fairly kind, one of the guards, to bring them a tree. And so he hid a little 4-inch sapling in his boot and snuck it into the camp and gave it to her. And then behind the barracks, they held a little ceremony where they planted the tree. And for the next several years, children would take some of their daily water rations and water this tree to keep it alive. This is an act of love, right? When you care about something so much, you're willing to make sacrifices like that in order to care for something, to nurture it, to see it grow. And this is what we mean by when we say like something is really an act of love, something like that. So this is a beautiful ceremony, and it was really nice. We had the local news stations there. It was the eve of Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, and that day, national news was yet another attack on a synagogue in Manchester, England, violent attack. It was also the day somebody attacked the Mormon church in Michigan, firebombed it and shot some of the worshipers there. And this is really puzzling. So how can we be a society in which, in some ways, love is a defining feature of our lives? We talk about it all the time. It's deeply motivating for us. And yet others seem to be motivated by just the opposite, a desire for destruction. And how many societies have defined this is they say, well, some people just love what is good, and some love what is evil. And people are drawn to one or the other, to the light or to the dark. People are drawn one way or to the other. We find this is not a new idea, it's a very old idea. In Augustine's time, the name for it was Manichaeism, that there are two kind of eternal sources in the world that are always pulling and always at war within us, and we have to choose which side we follow, the good or the evil, the light or the dark. And some people choose one and some people choose the other. And in our time, we recognize it as part of the George Lucas Star Wars universe, where you have the Force that can either be light or dark, good or evil. But you see it in all kinds. We see it in folk tales. We also see it in a way in pretty much throughout our popular culture. And this is why, like, we can celebrate when bad people get their just desserts, because after all, they've chosen the evil. They're identified with the evil. And so there's a way in which this goes quite deep in that we explain to ourselves like how people are drawn to one or the other by what they're attracted to. And Augustine rejected this. It was the dominant view in his society at the time, this idea of what they called Manichaeism. And it was like, I would say it was kind of the dominant cultural view in the West for probably at least 1,000 years, maybe a little bit longer. What happens in Augustine's time is he draws on two sources. He draws on his reading of Plato, and we talked about this at the last lecture, this idea of the good, of being the good identified with the light, but everything that people see in the cave, it's shadows. It's shadows or reflections of the light. It doesn't have an existence on its own. It's all derivative of the good. And he also draws on Jewish and Christian scripture that God created the world, and in nowhere in those descriptions is there a description of God creating the world in contrast or in competition with an equally powerful force of evil. It's just God creating the world, and everything in it is good. And so if everything in it is good, then where does this war come from where it seems like some people choose like what is intentionally evil? They seem to be drawn towards or love what is violent, what is destructive. I think we see it today in our politics, where we see this extreme polarization. And I've been noticing for a number of years now that the dominant word that many of our politicians use is fight. They promise that they're going to fight for us, fight for our side. They're going to fight against the other side. When really bad things happen, they use that language, but they always contrast it with the unreasonableness, the irrationality. They usually don't use the word evil, but what they're clearly saying is that there's nothing good on the other side. So the commentator Paul Waldman said in a piece this spring, Republicans hate you. They think you're lazy. They think you're stupid. A couple weeks ago, after we had another violent incident, Marjorie Taylor Greene said, there is nothing on the left to talk about. They hate us. Now, when you see people on both sides of our political extremes characterizing the others as completely irrational, as lazy or stupid or unreasonable, we can't talk with them, we can't collaborate with them. And even an attitude that comes about, well, even to collaborate with them is to collaborate with evil, so how would we do it? Then there's no chance, like in our politics, of reaching any kind of agreement. It's one side wins or the other, and what counts as one side winning? It's the destruction of the other side. I think we should be very suspicious of such talk. And there's a number of reasons for this, but the reasons are reasons that Augustine points out, the reasons that he uses for rejecting Manichaeism. First of all, everybody thinks that they are on the side of the righteous, and that's their opponents that are on the side of evil. That right there should be kind of a warning sign. So if there really are two sides of drawing, why can't people identify what side they're on? Why does both sides think they're on the side of the good or the righteous? Second, if the other side loves evil, there's no point in ever collaborating. Then all that is left is destruction of the other. And that's the opposite of what we mean by good. So how can we think we're on the good side if all our focus is on destruction of the other, because that's exactly what we identify as being evil. And then third, it's just not true. It's an exaggeration. And we know it's an exaggeration. It's a distortion of the facts. It's a distortion of humanity. And when we were looking at Socrates 4 weeks ago, we remember what he said about that the greatest wrongdoing comes from being convinced that you are right, from being convinced that you know something that you don't. That's why, the good person always asks questions, always seeks to understand. So you never shut other people out of conversation. Because what you're doing, if you do that, what you're doing is you've got a distorted picture of who the other person is. Let me just give you some facts about this, like how stupid it is to claim that everybody on the other side politically from us is unreasonable or irrational or devoted to doing bad. There are approximately 345 million people in the United States right now. There are about 60 million of those 345 million who are caregivers. That's a lot of caregivers. 5 million are paid caregivers. Everybody else, about 55 million, are unpaid caregivers. These are people who are taking care of those who cannot care for themselves, oftentimes family members. Of that 55 million, about half vote Democrat and about half vote Republican. And there's no way we would say 25 or 30 million of the people who are devoting themselves to the care of other people who can't care for themselves are lazy or stupid or irrational or incapable of reason or devoted to doing evil. It's just false. And so, how do we make sense of this? Well, we make sense of it by saying that we say these things that at some level we know are not true, that they're exaggerations, they're distortions, but they're harmful to us because they put us in a position in an adversarial position. And that overwhelmingly, people are acting out of love. This is what everybody's doing because they're convinced that they are doing some good. Overwhelmingly, people are motivated by and committed to doing what is good. The truth is, Augustine says nobody loves evil, not even the people who do terrible things. And he illustrates that by telling a story from his childhood. He says when it could have been, we're not sure how old he was, probably a teenager, maybe like 13, 14 years old. He was with a group of friends, and it was at night, and they were walking past an orchard, and some of them had the idea that they should climb over the fence and steal some pears from the orchard. And he said, I knew it was wrong, my friends knew it was wrong, but somebody suggested it. Nobody wanted to be the only one who wouldn't do it. And so we all climbed over the wall, we stole these pears. The pears weren't even ripe, so we just threw them on the ground. It was pointless destruction. So why did we do it? Well, because we wanted to be admired by our friends. And isn't that a good thing? To want your friends to like you, to be admired by your friends. Of course it's a good thing. And he said, this is why everybody does anything that is wrong, because they're looking at it narrowly, they're looking at only one aspect of something, and they think under that aspect, this seems justified, this seems like we should do it. And so on the one hand, you're saying, yeah, I know people say it's wrong, but isn't it more important that I'm admired by my friends at this moment? As long as we don't get caught, maybe. Okay. And he goes through a list of every act he can think of that somebody has done that we say, well, that was just done for evil. We think, well, no, somebody had something to gain. There was some aspect under which they were thinking it was justified, it was worth doing. And he comes out of this saying that, so everybody who does things, even that things that are almost universally condemned, are done because at the time the person thinks of it as something good. And it's not true that people love evil. People love good. We're just often mistaken about what the good is. And what he describes is that we are people that have desires. And we are always drawn towards all kinds of things in the world. We're drawn towards to the love of status or reputation. But we're hungry, we want food. We're thirsty, we want a drink. But we don't have complete knowledge. We don't have the knowledge of how all of these different desires fit in together and how they fit in coordination with other people. And so our desires can come into conflict where Mort and I want the same thing and we're in competition and we get into a fight over it. But he says when we do that, that right there shows that there's something wrong, because whatever we're in a fight over is not as important as the two of us are. And when we say we get in a fight over some possession that we both want, we're valuing something that's not as important and not valuing properly what is important, which is the other person. And he says violence always comes out of this. It's about this, what he calls a disordered love. It's not that it's wrong to love the things in the world. It's wrong to not love them according to their reality and according to like their real substance. And there's something much more real, something much more substantial about other people than any of the things that I might possess. And so it's wrong ever to love these things in priority with other people. And when he reads the first letter of John, and he gives a series of sermons on this letter that are all focused on love, what he returns to over and over again is love one another. Like, love one another. This is the fullness of the law. How do we know that we're loving God? If we're loving one another. This is what tells us. And how do we do that? How do we do that in our daily actions? It is by seeking understanding with one another. It is to engage one another in conversation. And so a word he uses over and over again is conversio. And sometimes conversatio. Now, conversio is to turn together. Conversatio is a life in which you are turned together with others, with your neighbor, and with God. It literally means, it's from the Latin words together, together, and vertera, to turn. Conversion or conversation. And I love the idea that the root of the word conversation is to turn together. When we are turned, when our attention is on one another, we are in conversation. That is always an act of love. When we avert our eyes, when we avert our attention, that literally means to turn away. That became, in the Middle Ages, the dominant Latin word for sin. Became how do you know that you're not living in righteousness? It's when you are turning away from your neighbor, when you're turning away from God. What are acts of aversion? Well, these are acts of violence. When we turn others away, whenever instead of seeking to understand one another, we seek to control or manipulate. When we seek to control or manipulate, or when we deceive others, what we are doing is we are trying to turn them, right? We are trying to turn them to our will. We are not turning ourselves towards them. And And I love the imagery there, and it gives me a way of always thinking now, like, so, am what I'm doing at this moment, is this a good thing? Well, what is my impulse? Is it to turn together to somebody, or is it to turn away? And if it's turned away, I'm suspicious of it. When our politicians are telling us to turn away, I'm suspicious of them. Now, they're suspicious of many of them for other reasons, but the politicians that I admire are the ones who are turning us together in conversation. So I want to wrap up here by saying what this does is it gives us the idea of two forms of love. There's one form of love when we're turning together. This leads us outwards and upwards. Because when I have to turn towards somebody else, it takes me out of myself. Okay? The form of love that is inwards or downwards, this is when I'm trying to turn others towards my will, or I'm trying to possess. We speak of this sometimes as lust or hunger. When we want to devour something, we want to bring things under our control. We want to possess it. We want to control it. We want to manipulate it. This is that aversio. This is that turning, we're turning inwards. But genuine love is turning outwards. It's turning outwards to others. That's why it often requires a sacrifice, because it means that we have to give up our conception of ourselves, who we have control over, and enter into a relationship that might change us. And this is the very nature of love. Of the best kinds of love are the kinds of love in which we might be transformed by the relationship. Okay? This is the central message of Augustine. He says, how are we trained in this love? This love of conversio? It is by love of our neighbor. Whenever we're in genuine conversation with the others, we are being trained more and more in this conversio. By helping others who are in front of us day by day, by seeking to understand, not to control. This is the genuine form of love. So that's love, and we're lecture 3. I hope you see how we're kind of building now. Like this is like building on what Socrates said about truth. Truth is always seeking to be in conversation, talking to others, asking the questions. It's drawing us outward. The good, for Plato, it's the source of everything that is. It's the only thing that is. But not everything that is created by the good is worthy of our full attention. Some of it is shadows. Some of it's reflections. And we want to be drawn upward. And then Augustine taking all of that and saying, well, this shows us why love is something that fills our life, makes us better by transforming us and drawing us into deeper relationship with others. Okay? So I've given you some questions. I gave you a number of quotes that come just from Augustine's sermons, because these are not studied very much and read, and I think there's just little gems about love in those sermons. But then also some questions for your table. So take about 15 to 20 minutes to talk at your tables, those questions or anything else you want to talk about.